Have you ever felt emotionally drained after doing the right thing? You were kind, generous, agreeable, yet somehow ended up feeling invisible, resentful, or worse, hollow. You smile in meetings, nod through family drama, stretch yourself thin for friends, and still go to bed with that tight feeling in your chest that whispers, you gave too much, again. But here's a Stoic truth most people aren't ready to face. Not all kindness comes from virtue. Some of it comes from fear. Fear of being disliked, fear of rejection, fear of not being enough unless you're always useful, helpful, agreeable. And when kindness is fueled by fear, it's not noble, it's a trap, a silent one, a praised one, but still a trap. According to Epictetus, whenever you're doing something for someone, pause and ask, am I acting freely, or am I enslaving myself to their opinion? This subtle slavery is everywhere. It wears a smile, it says, no problem. But it often hides a deeper truth. We're trying to buy love, approval, or validation with the currency of self-abandonment. Ryan Holiday, a modern Stoic voice, brings it into the present. People-pleasing is not kindness, it's a form of manipulation, rooted in the fear of disapproval. This is the Stoic Lighthouse. Let the Stoic Lighthouse guide you toward peace and wisdom. And in today's video, we're going to uncover 9 surprising ways kindness can secretly turn against you, and more importantly, what the Stoics would tell you to do instead. From ancient teachers like Marcus Aurelius and Seneca to modern minds like Donald Robertson and Massimo Pigliucci, we're diving deep into the psychology behind generosity and how to free yourself from the kind of goodness that costs you your peace. So hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and stay with me to the end, because the last insight might completely change how you relate to yourself and everyone else. Number 1. The trap of hidden validation. At first glance, being kind seems like an unquestionable virtue. You help, you support, you give, you listen. But under the surface there's a quieter, more dangerous pattern, one that even the Stoics warned us about. What if your kindness isn't actually free? What if it's not an expression of virtue, but a strategy to avoid rejection, a tactic to feel needed, a disguised form of control dressed in politeness? According to Chrysippus, one of the architects of Stoic logic and ethics, the truly good action is guided by reason. If it is poisoned by the desire to please, it loses its moral value. And that's the first crack in the illusion, because most of us don't realize how much of our kindness is actually a transaction. We smile to keep the peace. We agree to avoid conflict. We say yes because we're terrified of what no might mean. But what starts as helpfulness becomes a pattern of self-erasure, where you're no longer acting from your principles, but from your need to be liked. Panaetius of Rhodes, known for shaping Stoicism for Roman life, made this point clear. The virtuous man does not depend on the gaze of others because he understands the weight of his own principles. And here's the harsh truth. The more you shapeshift to be accepted, the more your identity dissolves. You begin editing yourself to match other people's expectations. You become the agreeable co-worker, the always-there friend, the problem solver who never has a problem. And slowly, without noticing, you disappear. This isn't just emotional exhaustion, it's moral distortion, because you're not being kind. You're negotiating your self-worth. Donald Robertson, a modern Stoic psychotherapist, bridges ancient thought with modern awareness. The more we act to avoid discomfort, the more we train ourselves to fear it. So what's the Stoic path forward? Practical Stoic application. Before any act of kindness or help, ask yourself, if no one saw me do this, would I still do it? That one question is a scalpel. It cuts through performance and reveals purpose. If your answer is yes, then you're acting from reason, from integrity, from your inner logos. If your answer is no, you've found the fear, and you've been given the chance to choose something better. As Cleanthes wrote, the soul is only free when it can sustain itself. And that freedom, That's where real kindness begins. Not from craving praise, but from clarity. Not from needing love, but from knowing your own worth. Number 2, the subtle error, confusing kindness with submission. In American culture, we're often taught that being nice is the safest path through life. Don't make waves. Be agreeable. Keep the peace. Whether it's in the boardroom, the classroom, or a Thanksgiving dinner where politics come up, many of us have been trained to keep our voice low, our head down, and our boundaries blurred. But here's what the Stoics would call that. Not kindness, but quiet self-betrayal. When your gentleness comes at the cost of your truth, you are no longer being virtuous. You are being compliant. And that distinction matters. Panatius of Rhodes, the Stoic who adapted philosophy to real-world Roman society, put it bluntly, "Virtue demands that we be just, not pleasant, and justice begins with integrity toward oneself." To the Stoics, justice is not about being fair to others first. It's about being fair to your own moral compass. And if you're constantly silencing yourself to avoid conflict, you're violating the very reason you were born with, your inner logos. That divine spark meant to guide your decisions with clarity and courage. This is where the confusion begins. Many people equate politeness with virtue, but Stoicism draws a hard line. Virtue is active. It's a deliberate alignment with reason and nature. Submission, on the other hand, is passive. It surrenders your agency not to truth, but to tension. It confuses being quiet with being wise. It avoids confrontation not because it's unnecessary, but because it's uncomfortable. According to Heracles, the Stoic who developed the theory of moral circles, we must extend care to others, but never at the cost of abandoning the center that holds us together. He was speaking of the moral order of relationships. At the core of every interaction is your own center, your principles, your self-respect, your reason. And when you sacrifice that to avoid a difficult conversation or please someone louder than you, you're not acting with compassion. You're acting from fear. Let's be honest. How many times have you said yes when your gut screamed no? How often do you offer help, not because you want to, but because you feel like you should? In corporate environments, this happens all the time. You take on extra work, laugh at bad jokes, let passive-aggressive behavior slide because standing up feels risky. But to the Stoics, the greater risk is always internal, the erosion of your character. Marcus Aurelius wrote in his Meditations, "If it is not right, do not do it. If it is not true, do not say it." That means truth must guide both our silence and our speech. And if you're silent just to maintain appearances, you're living from the outside in, not the inside out. That's not harmony, that's submission in disguise. Massimo Pigliucci, a modern Stoic voice and philosopher, reframes this dilemma with clarity. There is a difference between being kind and being a doormat. Stoicism is not about being agreeable, it's about being aligned. So what does Stoic kindness actually look like? Practical Stoic application. Start observing the moments when you agree just to avoid discomfort. Before saying yes, ask yourself, am I choosing this from strength or from fear of being judged? Stoic kindness is not soft, it is steady. It's not loud, but it's not silent when truth is at stake. It knows when to say no with composure and when to speak with calm authority. It's not about avoiding friction, it's about preserving direction, because in the end, being nice might get you approval, but being just earns you self-respect, and that's something no one can give you, but everyone can feel when it's real. Number 3, the paradox. The more you please, the less you're respected. There's a hidden cost to always being agreeable. You think you're creating harmony, but what you might be doing is training others to ignore your boundaries. The more you give without resistance, the more people assume you have nothing to protect. And here's the paradox that the Stoics understood long before modern psychology. When you try too hard to be liked, you slowly erase the very things that make you worthy of respect. Zeno of Citium, founder of Stoicism, taught that personal power lies in kratos, the inner strength to remain centered regardless of external approval. He wrote, "Virtue does not sway with the winds of opinion. The one who lives to please becomes a servant to instability." Think about that in today's world. In a corporate setting, if you're the one who always says yes, stays late, absorbs blame, and never speaks up, you may be seen as nice, but you likely won't be considered a leader. In friendships or relationships, the person who always gives in eventually becomes invisible. That's not because people are cruel, it's because you failed to show them where your lines are. Cicero, the Roman statesman influenced heavily by Stoic thought, had a name for this balance, dignitas, the dignity of character. He wrote, "Kindness without firmness degenerates into irrelevance. Virtue must inspire affection, yes, but also reverence. And reverence comes from clarity, from knowing who you are and what you stand for. If you're constantly adjusting your opinions, your time, your energy to please others, you become like fog, soft, ever-changing, and eventually easy to ignore." Ryan Holiday puts it in modern terms, "If you don't set a boundary, the world will assume you don't have one." This doesn't mean being harsh or rigid. Stoicism isn't about aggression, it's about alignment. A Stoic doesn't need to shout to be heard, but they do need to speak from truth. They don't need to control others, but they must control themselves, because when you please everyone, you stand for nothing. And when you stand for nothing, you disappear. Practical Stoic application. Practice what the Stoics called eutaxia, the ordered structure of life. Speak with gentleness, but carry the weight of your values. Next time someone pushes your limits, ask yourself, am I about to say yes because it's wise, or because it's easier than saying no? If it's the latter, pause, realign. Say no calmly, clearly, without guilt. That moment of friction may feel uncomfortable, but it's how self-respect is forged. Because kindness that lacks backbone isn't kindness at all, it's self-erasure. And the Stoic path, it begins where people-pleasing ends. Number 4, the quiet signals that your kindness has become self-sabotage. You wake up already tired, your calendar is full, but none of it feeds your soul. You say yes to favors, carry the emotional weight of friends and family, smooth over tension at work. And yet, when you finally sit down alone, there's a growing sense that something isn't right. That somehow you're missing from your own life. That's not generosity, that's not virtue. That's what the Stoics would call a subtle betrayal of the self. Posidonius of Apamea, a later Stoic philosopher who brought a psychological depth to the tradition, saw these kinds of behaviors as signals of imbalance. He warned, "The soul that cannot balance the impulse to please with the purpose of being will burn itself out and vanish." And in Stoic terms, this isn't just burnout. It's a misalignment of your moral compass. You're not acting from logos, the rational order within. You're reacting to expectations, guilt, and the need to be perceived as good. And over time, your actions may still look kind on the outside, but internally, they chip away at your emotional integrity. Let's put this into real-world context. You're always available for your co-workers. You take late calls, cover shifts, or help with someone else's presentation. You're the friend who listens for hours, even when your own tank is empty. You feel guilty turning down dinner invites, even though your body is screaming for rest. On the surface, you're nice, but inside, you're running on fumes. Hierocles, the Stoic who gave us the model of concentric moral circles, insisted that self-care isn't selfish, it's the foundation of justice. He stated, "The first moral duty of a rational being is to maintain harmony within their own circle. That's because you cannot extend anything meaningful to others if you're running on emotional debt." Stoicism teaches that we are responsible first for our internal stability, and only then can we interact with others from a place of strength. Modern Stoic voices echo this ancient wisdom. Robertson reminds us that chronic people-pleasing isn't kindness. It's anxiety management in disguise. And it backfires, because the more you abandon yourself, the more invisible you become, not just to others, but to yourself. Ryan Holiday expands this with a modern lens. You can't give what you don't have. Draining yourself to lift others isn't noble. It's unsustainable. Practical Stoic application. Audit your day. Look at every yes you gave. Now ask, was this a wise use of my energy, or was I avoiding the discomfort of setting a boundary? If more than half your actions were driven by guilt, fear, or obligation, you're not serving others. You're abandoning yourself. And for a Stoic, that's not compassion. That's chaos. Because real kindness doesn't cost you your peace. It doesn't leave you hollow. And it never requires you to disappear in the process. Number 5. The fatal mistake. Prioritizing others and forgetting yourself. You're always available, always helpful, always dependable. You're the one who shows up, who solves the problem, who puts others at ease. But somewhere in that endless giving, you've started disappearing from your own life. You skip meals, postpone rest, sacrifice your peace, not because you're selfless, but because somewhere along the way you confused worth with usefulness. This is the fatal mistake the Stoics would confront head-on. When you forget your own soul in the name of serving everyone else, you are not being virtuous. You are being out of order with nature. According to Heracles, whose moral framework placed self-care at the center of human ethics, before extending care outward, one must ensure harmony within. No one can offer stability if they themselves are unbalanced. Think about that in today's reality. In American work culture, burnout is worn like a badge of honor. The employee who answers emails at midnight is praised. The mom who never takes a break is admired. The friend who always says yes, even when exhausted, is seen as loyal. But what the Stoics would ask is far more cutting. At what cost? Panaetius of Rhodes, the Stoic bridge between Greek thought and Roman duty, believed that living well meant honoring your rational nature, and that includes recognizing your limits. He taught, to live rightly is not to give endlessly, but to act in line with reason, and reason demands self-preservation. In other words, being a good person does not mean sacrificing your integrity, your health, or your time without reflection. That's not goodness, that's disorder. This principle was echoed centuries later by Marcus Aurelius, emperor and philosopher, who had the weight of an empire on his shoulders. If you don't value yourself, you will always be at the mercy of those who don't either. And that mercy often looks like expectations. People expect you to always be there, to never say no, to keep giving, because that's what you've trained them to expect. But here's what Stoicism makes clear. There's no virtue in depletion. The world doesn't need more self-sacrificing martyrs. It needs more grounded individuals, people who give from fullness, not from fear. Robertson drives this home in his modern Stoic work. You can only sustain others if you are rooted in stability. A life of virtue starts with the self, not ends with it. Practical Stoic application. Reassess your definition of being a good person. Ask yourself, am I useful because I'm whole, or because I've made myself small for others? Start scheduling time to restore your mind and body, not as a luxury, but as a duty. Begin practicing assertive stillness, the art of saying no without defensiveness, and resting without guilt. Because the Stoic path isn't about neglecting the world. It's about engaging it fully once you've anchored yourself first. Number 6. What nature teaches about emotional balance. Look around you. Nature doesn't rush, but everything gets done. The seasons don't compete with each other. Rivers don't apologize for carving stone. Trees don't shrink to make room for others. There is a rhythm to everything, a limit, a cycle, a quiet wisdom in how the natural world balances force with stillness, giving with restraint, movement with pause. And the Stoics believed we should do the same. Zeno of Citium, founder of Stoicism, built his entire philosophy around this principle, to live in agreement with nature. He explained, "Just as the tree grows upward, rooted firmly in the ground, so too must the soul rise with purpose, anchored in its nature." But let's bring this to your everyday life. In modern culture, especially in the US, we're praised for pushing past our limits. Hustle is glamorized, overcommitting is normalized, even exhaustion is romanticized as grind mode. But nature never operates in overdrive, and when it does, storms come. Cleanthes, Zeno's successor and a poet of cosmic balance, taught that true virtue flows with the order of the universe. He wrote, "The soul should move with the rhythm of the stars, measured, steady, unwavering, not frantic, not erratic." So what happens when your kindness ignores that rhythm? You become like a river, trying to flow without banks. You flood, you overextend, you erode your own foundation. That's not compassion, it's emotional recklessness. Let's ground this in something real. Think about how we handle generosity in America. People stay on the phone for hours helping others, even when their own to-do list is drowning them. They volunteer for one more school committee, say yes to one more favor at work, take on another late-night favor, without asking if it's sustainable. Over time, this kindness turns chaotic, and chaos is the enemy of the Stoic soul. Modern voices reinforce this ancient view. Massimo Pigliucci, author of How to Be a Stoic, connects this directly to our everyday lives. Living in harmony with nature means knowing when to act and when to rest, when to give and when to preserve. And that preservation is not selfishness, it's wisdom, because even the sun, the most giving force in the sky, knows when to rise and when to set. Practical Stoic application. Take a moment. Look at how you're living. Ask yourself, does my kindness reflect nature's balance, or am I forcing something beyond what's sustainable? Are you giving like the tide, consistent, reliable, but always returning to center? Or are you pouring yourself out like a storm, all at once with no thought for recovery? Because in the Stoic worldview, the truly wise don't waste energy. They give, yes, but only in rhythm with their reason. They serve, but not to the point of self-collapse. And like nature itself, they endure. Number 7. Why saying yes too often destroys your self-discipline. Self-discipline isn't just about waking up early or sticking to a workout plan. In Stoicism, it's much deeper. It's the ability to govern your life with intention, to act from reason rather than impulse. And nothing sabotages that quiet power faster than a compulsive yes. Every time you agree to something without thinking, just to avoid discomfort, you surrender a piece of your sovereignty. Chrysippus, who laid the foundation of Stoic ethics, made this point clear. What lies within our control is the power to judge and act by reason. To give it up is to give up the logos itself. The modern world makes this harder than ever. Texts, pings, invites, demands, they come fast and we're expected to respond faster. And so we say yes without thinking. Yes to another project, yes to a favor, yes to one more commitment. But what we're really doing is saying no to ourselves. Zeno of Citium, at the very birth of Stoicism, described discipline not as rigidity, but as clarity of intention. He taught, freedom is not doing what you want, it is choosing with wisdom what must be done. But how often are your choices actually yours? In today's culture, especially in American work and social life, boundaries are blurred. Co-workers assume you're always available. Friends expect instant replies. You feel guilty turning down invitations or declining help. So you say yes, not because you chose it, but because you feared the awkwardness of saying no. This is where self-discipline begins to rot, not from laziness, but from accommodation. You slowly give your time, your attention, your energy to everyone, until there's nothing left to direct toward your own goals, and the result, a life where you're busy but not fulfilled, productive but not purposeful. Ryan Holiday, in Discipline is Destiny, captures this erosion well. You cannot build a life of excellence if you are constantly reacting to the needs of others before honoring your own. That doesn't mean closing yourself off. It means pausing before you say yes. It means reclaiming the space between stimulus and response. Practical Stoic application. Before agreeing to anything, stop. Ask yourself, is this aligned with my values, my priorities, and what I committed to today? If not, have the courage to say no, not with anger, not with guilt, but with calm, respectful clarity. That is Sophrosin, the Stoic virtue of self-control in action, because discipline isn't just about what you do, it's about what you protect. And your peace, your time, your direction, these are sacred. Treat them that way. Number 8, the harsh truth. Not everyone deserves your kindness. This may be one of the hardest Stoic truths to swallow. Not everyone is worthy of your kindness. We're taught that love should be unconditional, that empathy makes the world better, that turning the other cheek is always the high road. But here's what the Stoics knew, and what modern life keeps confirming. When your kindness is indiscriminate, it becomes currency for manipulation. And when you give it to the wrong people, it doesn't elevate anyone. It just drains you. Cicero, drawing directly from the teachings of Panaetius, put it like this: blind benevolence is as dangerous as deliberate cruelty. Both ignore what is truly deserved. In other words, being kind without discernment is not noble. It's reckless. And in today's world, that recklessness is everywhere. In friendships where you keep forgiving betrayal. In workplaces where your helpfulness is taken for granted. In family dynamics where love is assumed to mean tolerance for disrespect. You give, you compromise, you stay quiet, and little by little you become an accomplice to your own mistreatment. According to Panaetius, one of the most pragmatic voices in ancient Stoicism, generosity that empowers injustice is not a virtue, it is a failure of judgment. This isn't about becoming cold, it's about becoming precise. Because true kindness in Stoicism is filtered through two key virtues, justice and wisdom. Justice asks, is this person acting in alignment with what's right? Wisdom asks, is this action supporting the harmony of the whole or enabling chaos? Think of it this way. Would a doctor give medicine to someone who misuses it? Would a firefighter pour water into a building already collapsing? Then why would you continue pouring your energy into people who distort, misuse, or discard your goodwill? Donald Robertson connects this directly to emotional boundaries. Stoicism teaches us not to shut off compassion, but to offer it wisely, where it serves the greater order of reason. Let's be specific. Imagine someone in your life who consistently oversteps, asks too much, gives too little, and shows no effort to change. You've helped them, defended them, covered for them, and still they take more. A Stoic wouldn't call that loyalty. They'd call it imbalance. Because every time you give without wisdom, you distort the moral structure you're meant to protect. Hierocles, through his theory of concentric moral circles, clarifies that kindness should expand outward, but never bypass the center. He wrote, "The more distant the circle, the more deliberate we must be in our giving, lest we abandon the center that holds us together." That center is your reason, your self-respect, your emotional stability. It must remain intact. Practical Stoic application. Before you give your time, energy, or empathy, ask, does this person respect what I offer, or do they exploit it? Is this kindness supporting growth, or enabling dysfunction? If the answer reveals misuse, then distance is not cruelty, it's clarity. You're not cutting them off, you're restoring balance, because kindness without discernment is like watering weeds hoping they'll bloom, and the Stoic doesn't waste what is sacred. They give where there is fertile ground. Number 9, the simple test. Does your kindness come from freedom or fear? There's a moment before every kind act, a fraction of a second where your soul knows the truth. Are you doing this out of love or fear? Are you offering help because it's the right thing, or because you're afraid of looking selfish, rude, or unlovable? That's the Stoic razor. It doesn't judge your actions by how they look, but by where they come from. Panaetius of Rhodes, whose Stoicism was known for practical clarity, left us this guiding principle: an action done to avoid emotional discomfort rather than from reasoned duty falls outside the boundary of true morality. That means your motivation matters more than your appearance. If your kindness is just an escape route from guilt or rejection, it's not virtue, it's fear in disguise. And fear, to a Stoic, is always a signal that you've left the driver's seat of your own life. Let's bring this into the present. Picture yourself saying yes to something you don't want to do, attending a party, helping someone who never helps back, agreeing to a favor that ruins your schedule. On the outside, it looks like grace. Inside, you're full of tension. That's not generosity. That's a hostage situation, with your peace held at gunpoint by your fear of disappointing others. Epictetus, the freed slave turned philosopher, was relentless in his call for inner freedom. He reminded us, freedom is acting in accordance with reason, even when the world demands otherwise. He didn't say it would be easy. He said it would be liberating. Modern Stoics echo the same. Massimo Pigliucci warns that people mistake compulsive kindness for character, but it's often just conditioning. And Ryan Holiday puts it plainly: kindness without self-awareness isn't noble, it's self-destructive. So what's the test? How do you know if your kindness is clean? Practical Stoic application. Before you say yes, ask, if I had no fear of being disliked, rejected, or misunderstood, would I still do this? If the answer is yes, you're acting from freedom. If the answer is no, you've just uncovered a lie you've been living. And that moment of clarity is your turning point. Because true kindness, Stoic kindness, is not born from fear of losing others. It's born from the strength of not losing yourself. Let's take a breath and look at what we uncovered together. You learned that not all kindness is created equal. Sometimes it's a disguise. Sometimes it's a deal your soul is making just to feel safe. We revealed the trap of hidden validation when you act nice to be accepted, not because it's right. We exposed the confusion between gentleness and submission, where you trade truth for peace. We faced the paradox that the more you try to please everyone, the less you're respected. We decoded the silent signs of self-sabotage and called out the cultural lie that says being good means burning yourself out. We remembered with the Stoics that your first duty is not to be agreeable, but to be aligned. Your peace is not a gift from others, it is a result of your discipline. Not everyone deserves your kindness, and that's not cruelty, it's wisdom. And finally, real virtue doesn't grow in the shadow of fear. It thrives in the light of freedom. Seneca once said, "He who respects himself is feared by no one and manipulated by none." So now I ask you to take this reflection one step further. Drop a comment below and write, "I choose conscious kindness." Let's build a community where kindness is no longer a performance, but a practice rooted in clarity, self-respect, and strength. If this video challenged how you see yourself, hit like. If it made you pause and rethink your daily yeses, share it. And if you're ready to explore more Stoic truths that apply to real life, subscribe now and turn on notifications. Because in the next episode here on the Stoic Lighthouse, we'll uncover 8 Stoic principles that will transform your finances this month. Not vague advice, not hustle culture hype, but ancient wisdom made practical for how you earn, spend, save, and invest with virtue. Until then, stay steady, stay rooted, and let the Stoic Lighthouse guide you toward peace, clarity, and freedom. Because in a world that rewards noise, distraction, and approval-seeking, choosing clarity is rebellion, choosing reason is strength, and choosing conscious kindness, that's Stoicism in action.